About 12,000 years ago, during the Ice Age, glaciers carved out the Great Lakes and altered much of the land in the northern hemisphere. And glaciers still exist in many parts of the world today. In the northern hemisphere, you can find them at high altitudes in the Alps, the Himalayas, and the Rocky Mountains. In the southern hemisphere, they exist in the high Andes Mountains, which stretch the entire length of South America.
What are glaciers?
Glaciers are large bodies of ice that do not melt during the natural cycle of seasons. We call that perennial ice. A glacier is formed when enough snow accumulates that its weight compacts the snowflakes together to form ice. As more snow falls on top of the glacier, adding more weight, the glaciers flow down mountains and into valleys below. Dr. Brian Mark, a geographer and research scientist, specializes in the study of tropical glaciers found high in the Peruvian Andes Mountains. Tropical glaciers? Glaciers in the tropics?
What is a tropical glacier?
What's interesting about tropical glaciers, first of all, the name, right? Tropical glaciers, it's almost an oxymoron. I work in Peru, where there's tropical glaciers. In fact, the largest concentration of tropical glaciers on the planet is in a mountain range called the Cordillera Blanca of Peru, and it's about 9 to 10 degrees south latitude, which means it's well within the tropics, close to the equator, and it's high elevation, which means that our glaciers are above 5,000 meters above sea level. Okay, they don't exist below that because the conditions are too warm to sustain that ice year-round.
In the Alps and Rocky Mountains, accumulation of snow and ice occurs during the winter, and melting occurs during the summer. But tropical glacier activity is not dependent on winter or summer. It's dependent on the rainy season and the dry season.
What's interesting is, in contrast to maybe the northern hemisphere, high latitude, middle latitudes, the Alps kind of glaciers that maybe we're more familiar with, we don't have a winter snowfall and a summer melt season. What we have instead is an interesting juxtaposition where our seasonality is based more on the precipitation, okay, or the accumulation of snow, and that occurs during a rainy season. In Peru, between the months of about October and April, we get about 80% of the precipitation for the year. The rest of the season, or the rest of the half of the year, is kind of dry, very dry, really.
The rainy and dry seasons are an integral part of the life of a tropical glacier. In the past, they have maintained a balance between snow accumulation and melt. But in recent years, there's evidence that this balance is changing, and the glaciers are slowly disappearing.
Are glaciers connected to global climate change?
Throughout the world, we're seeing glaciers recede, and we're seeing that happen at an accelerating pace. Okay, and so that's indicating to us that something global is happening. And what I've witnessed and observed and measured in Peru is that we're seeing this as an accelerating pace or loss of ice. Not only the front of the glacier shrinking back, but the surface deflating as well. So the whole mass volume of these glaciers are receding. They're receding faster than they were in the past. Understanding climate change is a matter of understanding different scales of influence over different time scales and spatial scales. Now, understanding how the glaciers have responded to local climate variability is really important, as well as trying to understand the global warming impact on these glaciers. And if we can get dates on the ancient features in the landscape that indicate how big the glacier was, for example, the piles of rubble left by the glacier called a moraine, the lakes that are formed as the glaciers melt back, if we get ages on those features, that gives us a clue as to when the glaciers were where they were. And trying to fit that pattern of change with other examples throughout the world gives us a link to global dynamics. Okay, and so we are actively trying to understand how glacier response in the tropics relates to glaciers in the northern hemisphere and in the further down in the southern hemisphere, because trying to understand global climate dynamics is really important to understand what might happen in the future.